When it comes to your retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you found the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez, founder and managing member of ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hats and get ready to take back control of your retirement today. And for all the tomorrows to come, ILG's Financial Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now.
Well, this is the Retire Your Way podcast. Ron Stutz here, along with Dave Lopez of ILG Financial. With the Retire Your Way podcast, as always, you can get in touch with ILG Financial and have a conversation about your situation, but I will give you that number in just a moment. Just wanted to say hello to Dave. And Dave, I know that, it's been a while since we talked, but it's great to be back with you.
Boy, it sure is. This is going to be a great show. We've talked about it, and we're talking about things that are in the news right now that our clients are actually calling, asking about. So that's what we try to do with this podcast, and today is going to be on point with that.
As always, you can get in touch with ILG Financial by calling 540-720-5656 and have a one-on-one conversation about all of these things we talk about. Dave Lopez, of course, is the founder of ILG Financial. Hope you're having a good day today. One more time, that number right now, 540-720-5656. There is no shortage of scary buzzwords lately in the news, Dave, especially when it comes to our economic state as a country. And one of those buzzwords that you probably heard more and more lately is inflation. Of course, we always talk about inflation on this podcast, but it's especially hot right now. What is inflation, basically? How serious is it? And how does it affect me and my family? That's what everybody wants to know. Dave, can you help us start answering some of those important questions?
You bet, Ron. So what you're hearing right now is the talking heads and the sound bites on the news. We are hearing about inflation over and over again, and it can definitely be a little scary at times, can't it?
It absolutely can. And, I've been thinking about it a lot, too. And if you don't plan for inflation, you can be in deep trouble.
You bet. And we haven't heard it for years, right? So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it's popping up. So what we're going to do today is, instead of guessing or worrying about it for that matter, let's take a look at the data and the facts, and that will put us in a position so we are best equipped to strategize and find a solution. Mm-hmm. And we're going to start with the basics. What is inflation for those who are not used to the actual definition? In a nutshell, Ron, it is the consistent rise in overall price of goods or services. So that's what people mean when you hear somebody or the news saying, hey, the dollar is depreciating. All they're saying is that it takes more dollars to buy the same amount of goods. So, for example, it takes more dollars to buy the clothes you used to buy, the same clothes, or more dollars to buy the same groceries than you used to. Mm-hmm. It also means it costs more dollars for the same experiences. So the trip you're used to taking may cost more than it did last year. And it costs more dollars to be a patron of the same services. Now, where would you see that? Well, Netflix may cost more than it did, 2 years ago. Or what really hits retirees is the cost of your health care may go up, right? That's a service you're paying for.
Mm-hmm. And it's high enough already, that's for sure. And all of these things going up, which means the cost of living is going up. And it's definitely cause for pause. Mm-hmm. Why exactly does inflation happen? I mean, when you get right down to it, what causes it, and why are we hearing about it so frequently lately?
Yeah, great questions, Ron. So there's two main reasons that you will see inflation kick in. One of them is the increase in production costs. Now, that production cost can be either the increase in the cost of materials. So if it costs more for a manufacturer to buy the steel he needs to make his product, well, then prices are going to go up. But it also, production costs would include what? Well, it would include wages, right? So if wages are going up, then also the cost of production can go up. Right now, we're seeing the cost of materials go up. You're hearing that in the news all the time, aren't you? With the price of lumber and computer chips we'll talk about in a minute. But also the price of labor's going up because it's hard getting people back to work, especially if they're getting unemployment checks. So number one, for why inflation happens is an increase in production costs. Number two is a surge in the demand of a product or a service. So currently inflation, Ron, is in a large part, a result of what we have just lived through with this COVID-19 pandemic and the toll it has taken on the economy. So as an example, we are now coming out of literally a 12 to 13 month lockdown where the economy was locked down. People lost jobs because there was no demand. But now we've got, another way to say this, hordes of vaccinated people literally coming out of their houses, and they're ready to spend money. But what's happened is that the businesses haven't been able quickly enough to gear up with either the number of products needed that people want to buy or the employees to service, this onslaught of people. And remember, we said above, a surge in demand causes inflation. So what we are seeing is people who have received stimulus checks and they want to spend the money. That's creating a surge in demand. People are slowly returning to work, but there's a curve on there to get people retrained and get the businesses retooled, right? But consumers are ready for that stuff now, and that's creating a little bit of a bottleneck, and that ends in right now a period of inflation.
Well, you certainly got it right, because it seems like we just all of a sudden everything shut down. But on the other side of that whole thing, it's gradually taking time to get things back to normal, and we still might not be there for a while, but certainly we have seen a lot of encouraging signs. Dave, why is it in the news more these days? Inflation and all these things you're talking about.
Well, a couple of reasons. One, because we are in this period, and I do not see this going away for a long time, where both political parties are just at odds at each other, right? So again, it doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on. If one party's in charge, the other party's going to look at any reason to throw stones, right? To say, hey, this is your fault. Well, with this inflation going up, it does not look good for the current administration, right? It looks like they're unable to control this. So the right is putting that in the news more, where the left is trying to downplay it. For example, we read a very interesting article that was on Australian news. It's a great place to get news on the U.S. because it's less biased, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah, but they were actually joking, Ron, about a piece that came across that they had read that had been on the news, where they were addressing higher inflation. And the reason they were kind of laughing at us is that the government spokesperson said, well, yes, the inflation numbers are unusually high and they could be alarming, but don't worry about those, because if you take out gas and food out of that inflation index, inflation is still going up, but it's more reasonable. Now imagine that. So the Australian newscasters were laughing. They're saying, so all of you retirees in America, just don't buy gas and don't eat, and you don't have any inflation troubles. So, but you see the problem, right? Yeah. That's why one of the reasons it's in the news. Now, it's interesting to note that you'll also probably in the news hear the Federal Reserve mentioned quite a bit, don't you?
Yep, absolutely, every day.
Well, the Federal Reserve, a lot of folks don't know this, but it's their job to monitor price growth and try to control it, right? And they've been discussing this higher inflation as our economy returns to normal. And the Federal Reserve, Ron, has taken the stance that once these, let me put this in quotes, kinks, unquote, have been worked out, then they expect inflation to stop growing so quickly and get to what they consider a healthy level of inflation growth, which is probably in that 2 to 3% range. But really, you have to question, is that true? Just because they say it doesn't mean it's true. Is it true, or is it just another soundbite from the talking heads to kind of appease us? Many believe, economists I'm talking about here, that the uncertainty of the shock to our economic system of everything that was COVID, the last 12 to 13 months, and what you're seeing is the continued effects of this bumpy opening of our economy, is really leading us into an unprecedented period, an unprecedented time that could indicate the possibility of us being on the cusp, Ron, of a major change that could result in a period of long-run inflation, and that could be a bit troubling.
Yeah, it certainly could. We're talking about inflation today and all the effects of it, how it affects you and me, all of us, on the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez, the founder of ILG Financial. Once again, if you'd like to make a phone call to Dave's office and have a conversation, 540-720-5656. That is 540-720-5656. Continuing our conversation about inflation here today with Dave Lopez. Dave, I think the question we all have in our minds right now is, how will this affect me personally? And equally important, how will this affect my retirement?
Boy, that's a great question. And that really, with respect to what we do, and for all of our listeners, this really is the question, right? We are preparing for retirement. You hear all of these things, whether it's inflation or interest rates or, you name it. But what we really want to know is, what do I have to know to protect myself or put myself in the best possible situation? So let's talk about a couple issues that someone in or near retirement may want to address if they're worried about this coming inflation situation.
Okay.
First, I would say, though your budget may allow for inflation, and we certainly build that into the equation with the plans that we build for our client, Ron, if your budget may allow for inflation when it comes to purchasing goods and vacations and your daily Starbucks trips, the effect of inflation on your investments, your stocks, your bonds, your other investments that are tied to or part of your retirement accounts could become dangerous very quickly. And a lot of folks, they don't kind of process that they may have to tweak their investment strategy for a higher inflationary period.
Yeah.
Another example would be in retirement. Of course, most of us are living on a fixed income. Now, some of us have cost of living adjustments built in on some of our incomes and some don't. But it is disturbing when something like inflation kicks in, because it might cost you to eat up more of your other savings to make up the difference because of the higher prices, Ron. Mm-hmm. And if we're dipping into those other buckets sooner in retirement than we hoped for, it might give us pause that we could possibly run out of money from those extra buckets. So we want to kind of plan for that.
That sort of reminds me of what we talk about a lot on this podcast, the fact that you have to reassess from time to time. You can't just put a plan together and leave it there for 30 years. You need to take a look at it on a regular basis and make sure that you're keeping up with the times, because things do change.
Boy, they do. And you couldn't have said that better, because the specifically is as economic things change. We tell all of our clients, Ron, is that if something happens, whether it's in your personal life or something you see on the news, and you look to your husband or your wife or your friend and you say, hey, I wonder if that's going to affect my retirement plan. Mm-hmm. The answer should immediately be, let's assume it does, and let's call Dave and see if it does.
Yeah.
So never assume you're going to be okay. Assume the worst, and then we'll plan for the best. So that's a great point. So let's go on to a couple more. Do you mind?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So other ways that this higher inflation could affect us. Well, there are things for all of us that you haven't spent money on in what we call the accumulation phase of your life. That's, roughly 16 when you got your first lifeguarding job and entered the workforce, to roughly, 60, or when you started to plan for or enter retirement, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. You move out of the accumulation phase. We've talked about this, into the distribution phase. And in the distribution phase, there's some new bills. For example, additional health care costs that you didn't have when you were you were healthy and just paying for your health insurance. So rising health care costs because of inflation could be something that could literally devastate your plan and just sap all of your hard-earned savings more than you had anticipated, because you didn't plan on not just the amount of medical bills that you were going to have and the cost, but the inflated cost of them. Another example? Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, everybody knows that the cost of health care has risen so dramatically over the years and continues to do so, and that should be a concern for all of us.
It is. And of course, the takeaway is not necessarily to panic. Panic is just your indication. It's your mind telling you don't have all the data you need to make an educated decision, and that's why you're stressed. So when you feel that anxiety or that panic, that's when you want to get on the phone with us and say, hey, listen, I'm a little uneasy about this situation. Can we walk through how our plan's going to combat this? Mm-hmm. It all comes down to having a plan.
Okay, if you'd like to have a conversation about that with Dave Lopez, I'll throw that number in here one more time, 540-720-5656. Dave, what else you have for us?
Well, I would say when we're talking again about how inflation may affect you personally, the biggest takeaway is when it comes to your portfolio and, how to invest, a lot of folks, all they're thinking about is the income side, not if they should change up any investments. But there is a fine line, Ron, between positioning your portfolio so it will be able to withstand inflation, but at the same time, not being devastated if the Federal Reserve steps in and jacks up interest rates to lower inflation. Mm-hmm. So there's, a lot of moving parts here. So there is no, simple fix for that. It's kind of like fine tuning the radio back in the days when we wanted to get our, Casey Kasem's show on, and you can't just automatically turn the thing on. Sometimes you got to play with the knob a little to get it right. So it's important, we said it a couple times today, to take action, right? Give us a call. Let's take a look at your portfolio if this is a concern and talk about how higher inflation or possibly higher interest rates might affect your plan. And if it's necessary that we tweak it, let's put that into action.
Maybe you have a great plan in place already, but it may be necessary to do a little fine-tuning, a little tweaking, as Dave just put it. And again, that number to call is 540-720-5656 for ILG Financial. And you can have a conversation with Dave Lopez. It won't cost you anything and won't obligate you to do anything. Dave, it is not too late, but you need to take that first step now. And that first step is the phone call, of course. The train is coming, whether you move off the tracks or not. What can you do at this point?
Boy, that is true. And we tell folks all the time is that, if something like inflation is coming, it's coming whether you address it or not. And that's why I think that's a great analogy you used, right? Imagine a train coming down the tracks. You can pretend it's not and decide to stay on the track, or you can acknowledge that it's coming and move 5 feet off the track. The outcome, I would suggest to you, Ron, is completely different. Mm-hmm. But you're not affecting the fact that that train's coming. So acknowledge it's a possibility, at least, this inflation fear, and let's take actions to get you off the track in case it does come by. So what can we do? Well, if you're like a lot of retirees or soon-to-be retirees in or near retirement, these are some of the questions you are probably asking right now, or you should be asking with respect to your plan. Number one, will my cash flow continue to support me and my family if prices go up? Number two, will I have less buying power during retirement and have to make adjustments to my buying situation? Mm-hmm. Number three, should I reduce the duration of my fixed income assets? Ron, that's things like CDs or bonds, right? So should I go from a 20-year bond to a 10-year bond because I'm expecting interest rates, for example, to go up? Next, should I purchase more equity assets or what we call hard assets, things like commodities or real estate, because I'm expecting prices to go up? Another one, do I have too much cash in my emergency fund? If so, what do I do with some of it to try to get some growth? And in short, is my plan still on track, assuming that we might have rising inflation and it may be followed by rising interest rates?
The only thing constant is change, and you have to make those assessments from time to time, little tweaks on your financial plan in order to keep up to date with what's going on. And that's why it's a great idea to get in touch with Dave Lopez, because he can help you assess the situation and tell you where you are and what you need to do to get where you want to go.
Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, for most of folks listening today, the takeaway may be, hey, he talked about all the concerns, but he didn't give me any solutions. Mm-hmm. And sorry about that. But the reason that we didn't is everyone is different. Right, Ron?
Exactly.
Right? We've talked about there's no one-size-fits-all solution for this. Everyone's goals are different. Their amount of money they have, their risk tolerance is different. So what we have to do is tweak each portfolio differently based on where you are in your life and what the specific concern is. But there are a couple of different approaches that we can explore in general when we're strategizing for success for everybody. The secret is, if this is a concern of yours, if this resonates today, call the office. Ron gave you the number, or go right onto our website, and everything you need on the website to contact us is there. It's ilgfinancial.com. Let's take a look at your plan. Let's talk specifically about how higher inflation may affect your specific plan, and how maybe if the Fed raises interest rates to negate it, how that might affect your plan. Are you protected? Right? Can we put you in a position where you'll succeed regardless of whether that goes up or goes down? Because the key takeaway from today, right, is it never hurts to get a second set of eyes on what will be the next 20 or 30 years of your economic life. Ron, we get one chance to get this right. There are no do-overs for building out your retirement plan. So we want to make sure we've done everything we do to address what could happen, so we're not looking back with regret.
And the point that you made a moment ago is so important. Everyone's situation is unique. What's right for you is not necessarily the same as what's right for your neighbor or your brother-in-law or a coworker. Everyone's situation is different, and that is why it is so important to have that one-on-one conversation with Dave Lopez to talk about your situation specifically. And I know you meet with new folks all the time.
We sure do, and we love to do it. And what's interesting is it gives us a chance to meet new people, but it's so refreshing to get that first or second meeting and see the anxiety on someone's face just kind of melt away, where when they realize for the first time they're connected with someone who can walk them through building out a plan in a systematic way based on data, so they don't have to worry about missing some critical situation, some critical point like rising inflation that could just bankrupt them down the road because no one told them how to deal with it. So if you're new to ILG Financial, if a friend has turned you on to this podcast, give us a call, right? Ron will give you the number again for a no obligation sit down with me, and we can just see where you are and talk about where you want to be over the next 20 or 30 years. As
always, you can get in touch with ILG Financial by calling 540-720-5656. That is 540-720-5656. Dave Lopez, of course, is the founder of ILG Financial. If you'd like to find out more about the business, you can go to ilgfinancial.com. But again, one more time with that number, 540-720-5656. Thanks for joining us today for our conversation on inflation, something that we all need to be concerned about. And Dave, it's been my pleasure to hang out with you for a while.
You too. I enjoy our time together and look forward to our next podcast.
This is Ron Stutz along with Dave Lopez, and you've been listening to the Retire Your Way podcast.
Information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and not necessarily represent the views of Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC, registered investment advisor. Alpha Star and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities.